the things I've noticed is that when a family decides that they may want to homeschool, some parents seem really concerned about their ability to teach their child to read. I personally know some families who send their kids to preschool and kindergarten so that they learn how to read and then bring them back home to homeschool. So what I want to do in this video is just to share some strategies and encouragement that busts the idea that you need special training to be able to teach someone to read or that it's really difficult. One thing that I do want to say is while kindergarten is typically the time when you would send someone to public school to learn how to read, not every child learns to read on that schedule. And so one thing you need to make sure that you're doing is giving yourself grace, giving your child grace, and really going about it in a no pressure way if possible. I know in our experience we had 2 kids and they both were on different schedules. My oldest learned to read really quickly, and for my youngest it took a little bit longer. And I think that's something that we've got to go into when we are considering homeschool, is realizing that the schedule that is in public school or that is in our head or that all of our other kids followed is not necessarily going to be the same for all of your kids. I've been asked before, what is an accomplishment that you've made that you are the most proud of? And I always, hands down, say teaching my kids to read. Reading opens up the world to our kids, and it exposes them to story and adventure, and it just has a way of becoming part of your family culture. So I just want to encourage anyone watching this video that right now you may be in tears or like wringing your neck because you don't understand how you can go over a concept so many times and your kids still not get it. You will get there. One of the things that I really made sure that I did was to read in front of my kids and to have my husband have a book or a magazine or a newspaper that he's reading so that our kids see both of us reading and enjoying reading. And that also was a really helpful strategy to help them to see that reading is not just a school thing, that it is a life thing. So I want to start with sharing 5 resources, things that we actually used in our reading lessons in our homeschool. So the first one that I swear by is Easy Peasy All-in-One Homeschool. So whether you know about this or not, I just wanted to share a little bit about it and how formative it was in our reading life. So Easy Peasy All-in-One Homeschool is a completely free online homeschool curriculum that literally takes you from womb to graduation. And it is Christian based, but as far as the reading part, I think even, secular homeschoolers would be able to use this reading portion that we used without having any issues with it. So the reading section is under the preschool section, but don't let that cause you to not want to use it. If you don't want to start your kids learning letters and learning to read in the preschool age and you want to wait a few years, then I think that that's actually the preferred way. You can see there's each day very minimal, very low-key instructional. There are links to YouTube for ABC songs. But the thing that I love the most is for each letter, she has created a story. For A for alligator. That alligator is afraid and he always says, ah! And then there's a bee, who's literally like a bee, the insect, that is tired and he goes, bah, bah, bah. And then there's C for cat. And this cat has a hairball problem and it's like, k, k. What I did was each week we would start with the letter A, we would listen to that story. And she is very big on repetition, and so you don't just hear, it's not once and done. You go through and you hear that story. And it even gets reviewed later on, a few weeks later. And so we took those little animals, put pop sticks on them, and had them be characters. And I kept them in a baggie, and we would pull them out, and they would say whatever sound it is that they were known for. And your kids connect the idea that a letter is connected with the sound. Add into it these really fun sign language videos doing letters and other animated videos doing letters. And we went literally 26 weeks learning each of the letters. And by the end, my kids were able to start putting some of those sounds together. So this was the point when I pulled in a couple other resources. I used Phonics Pathway because I had read that it was a good, strong reading base. It was written by a reading teacher. It's not very well known. I don't see it a lot in the homeschool community, but it worked for us. Were my kids jazzed about doing it like they were about doing Easy Peasy? No, not really. But it did really get that foundation in, and we would sit in our little reading sack area and have the kids just read each of the words, and it would work on long A at one point, long E at another point, IGH at another point. The other thing that we did simultaneously was bring in Bob books. Bob books were phenomenal. I found the whole set. I don't think I got sight words, but I got all the rest of them. I found the whole set used on eBay. At the time, they were like $35 or $40. I'll check here to see how much they're going for now. The other thing is that Bob Books now also offers a workbook. I didn't really pair handwriting and writing with reading. It was just a thing where we would sit down together. So I don't even know if I would get a Bob workbook now to use it, but I did want to mention that that does exist. We would just sit down with the Bob books and read through them. Just if we had to stop because it was too strenuous or called seeing tears, which would happen, put a little bookmark in and stop for the day. So really wanted to try to have this no pressure kind of a reading situation if someone was getting frustrated. And that included me. I mean, we would go over all of these letters and sounds, like, okay, K makes this sound, k, k, k. We'd look at the word fork and my kids would be like, pineapple. And we're like, that, like, where is that coming from? And so even if I was starting to get frustrated, then we would just stop for the day. But we got through the entire Bob set, and again, that wasn't necessarily in 1 year. We did Easy Peasy to get the sounds down. We started with Phonics Pathway and Bob books, and that went through the next couple of years. And so this was a long process of literally sitting on a reading sack on the floor and going through each different step. We also did 2 other things that were different than just sitting together and reading. I do want to take a minute here to stop and say, to the mom who's watching this who has a child who you feel like is just really struggling with reading. First of all, it doesn't click with every kid right off the bat. So sometimes you will have a child who is not reading consistently, even at 7 and 8 and 9. And so the first thing I would say is you want to really kind of let your child lead in this area. But if you're really feeling like there is an issue, then obviously you would want to figure out what your next steps are to be able to support them. My son is left-handed, and so he was writing things backwards and wanting to start from right and going to left, getting B's and D's mixed up. And so I was just very careful to not get frustrated with that and to not get concerned with that and to just continue with, you know, we taped on his desk bed, because bed has the B and the D and the E in the middle to show him which way that it goes. Or you could get a ball and a bat, because the bat comes first and then the ball, and then the door with the doorknob for the D. And so having visual tips that can help your kids with those kinds of issues is beneficial. But you may be seeing something that needs a professional's help. And so I would say that you know, needs to be something that if you're concerned about that, you would kind of take the next steps to reach out to a professional to get that support. The Starfall app was just a fun thing to help reinforce what we were learning in Easy Peasy. I would not recommend doing that only because I do think that we need to have a stronger emphasis on the sounds that letter makes and sitting down and actually reading. But it was a fun Friday, let's reinforce it and watch some Starfall videos and do some Starfall app sensory kind of things. The fifth thing that I would suggest, which may seem like a little bit getting the cart ahead of the horse, but we really enjoyed pulling Scrabble in. And again, keeping it so simple. I will never forget getting CAT on the Scrabble board and having my son, who was my latest reader, read cat. I mean, it was so exciting. I mean, it was like, I remember him, he was so excited, he was running around, like it connected. And for him being so sensory oriented and physical, that having those tiles and spelling that out, he was able to slide them together slowly, and pull them together and make a word out of it. So I recommend that. A couple other resources that I would mention that we did. Easy Peasy really recommends McGuffey Readers. I learned on McGuffey Reader, and so I actually used mine from when I was in elementary school. I think they're fine. I do think the language starts to get more archaic as you get further into it. And so we read probably about 3/4 of the first one, and that was sufficient. I think it's good to really pull things out of context because it forces you to learn how to decode a little bit more than seeing a picture of Matt sitting on Sam in Bob's book. When you go into McGuffey Reader, it has words like lad that you're not necessarily going to hear in your everyday vernacular, and so then they're having to decode it that way. So a couple other resources then. Once we got through the Easy Peasy and the Bob books and were a good ways through Phonics Pathway, I was starting to feel like, okay, now is a good time to start bringing in early chapter books. And for both of my kids, there were 2 different ones. So for my oldest, Boxcar Kids was the way to go. The first 19 are written by the original author, and so we have those on our shelves. And we started the first one out with me reading out loud and then her reading to herself. So it was like I would read a little bit, get her into it, and then hand that over. I wanted to move from reading out loud to reading inside of her head and have that be a nice transition. Now, we still do reading aloud now, and my kids are going into 4th and 7th grade. So we still will do, my oldest will read something aloud, my youngest will. I want to make sure that we're still honing that skill, but I also wanted to transfer the reading out loud that we were doing for school when they were really little into reading inside of your head in a chapter book. For my youngest, he loved the Magic Tree House series. He got the Magic Tree House series, we found them used. He then started asking for Merlin Missions for his birthday. He's got the Super Edition. He loved Magic Tree House, and they were really great step ups for him to go from reading out loud with me to, again, reading quietly. And so those 2 books, you can get them at the library, you can find them used. I would highly recommend for that next step, again, years later, moving into that chapter book world. So in addition to those first resources of Easy Peasy and Phonics Pathways and Bob books, as well as Starfall and Scrabble, and then moving into the Magic Tree House and also the Boxcar Children books, the other thing that I would mention is you get to a phase where you really want to let your kids' interests lead what they're choosing for reading. So figure out what they're interested in. When we go to the library, I don't have my 9-year-old in the classic section or in a historical fiction middle grade section. He's in the Lego section, getting these big, huge Lego books out because he loves Lego. And so that's what he is interested in doing. My daughter is in the adult science section getting books about birds. Having things not limited for your kids. Now I realize there are times when they're going to choose things that are not appropriate, and you have to say, I really don't think that jives with our family belief structure. But for the most part, giving them free rein in a library and letting them choose what it is that they want to spend their time reading is important. I also am a big proponent of graphic novels. My son has a Bible that is completely a graphic novel format. So when during Lent, we all said we were going to read our Bible every morning before we got out of bed, he was reading his graphic novel version of that, and that's great. The other thing is audiobooks. I'm also a big fan of audiobooks. We do nightly, as we're eating supper as a family, we listen to books, and it has really been a formative part of our family culture. We always say gore because of Tales of Despereaux. That's a thing that we will say. Swallows and Amazons was another huge formative book for us as a family. Listening to The Long Winter in the winter with the kids and my husband, just it becomes this memory making base for our family. And so listening to audiobooks together, listening to audiobooks independently. My kids have access to Scribd so that they can listen to books that they enjoy. Now, I'm still a part of the decision making of, well, what are you listening to? But they have the ability to listen to books that they're interested in, just as I do. The other thing is read alouds, which is important. So not just listening to an audiobook, but having me read aloud and they read aloud is really important. They get to practice voices and they get to listen to inflection and learn about how different characters may talk. And it's just very important. Hold on, I have a cat who wants to come into the room with me. The other thing is making sure that you're including their personality in it. So humor. My youngest loves a plot-driven book. And so thinking as I'm choosing books for him to kind of decide what he wants to read, I'm going to choose a lot of plot-driven books to make sure that he is happy with the choices that he is making. And then the last thing is don't give up. I think sometimes it's really easy to feel like you're doing something wrong, or why is the people at my homeschool co-op, everybody's reading Lord of the Rings and we're still over here reading Magic Treehouse. And I just think it's important to not be playing the comparison game, but rather to just look at your kids as individuals in their specific place in their journey and thinking about what will make them love reading and to be lifelong readers. So if you have any encouragement or tips that you found in teaching your kids to read, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to read them and to get additional ideas to be able to share with our friends who have little ones who are in the process of learning to read as well. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time. So much cat hair. You need to be brushed.